Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm David Lamb, Director of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Very glad you could join us today for the next installment in our ISR Insight Speaker Series. For those of you unfamiliar with ISR, we have over 300 affiliated faculty from over 20 academic disciplines. We serve as a hub for rigorous social science research across a wide range of topics, including wealth and inequality, race and racism, politics and public opinion, teen drug use, economic behavior, aging and health, and much more. The goal of this ISR Insights Speaker Series is to share research findings for the public good. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Note that Zoom features a live transcription of this meeting. You can enable this by clicking the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. The chat feature is disabled, so please send in your questions through the Q&A feature of Zoom. You can send them in at any time, and we'll do our best to answer them before our time ends. Finally, note that recordings of all of our Insights events, and we've had a wonderful series in the last year, are posted on the news and events page of our website, isr.umich.edu. along with information on upcoming talks. Please check there and follow ISR on Twitter to stay connected. Just about a year ago, we launched this speaker series as a new way to keep everybody informed during the COVID shutdown. And we were joined by our speaker today, Dr. Pamela Davis-Keene, as our inaugural speaker. At that time, as the school year was ending, parents, educators, and researchers wondered how to deal with the COVID slide or the loss in learning students were predicted to have because of the switch from in-person to online-only classes. What we didn't know then was that many schools would struggle to open back up at all in 2020, and that online and remote learning would continue to be one of the primary ways that children were educated for the rest of the 2020-21 school year. So today the question remains, what will we need to consider regarding achievement and learning gains and losses as children are likely to return to in-person schooling in fall 2021? So today I have the pleasure of reintroducing Dr. Pamela Davis-Keene, who will be discussing her research on how homeschooling was discussed on social media, the issues related to holding back or repeating a grade in primary school, how new proposed policies for free community college may be important for helping those in secondary education get extra time to develop skills for entry into four-year college. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks very much to Pam for joining us once again. And I look forward to the discussion. I'll turn things over to Pam.
Thank you, David. So a year ago, just like David said, I had put forward some ideas about what I thought were going to be the challenges of fall 2020. And I'm just going to do a kind of a review here of where we are in order to set up kind of thinking about where we're going to go forward. So first off, sorry, I'm having trouble moving my slide forward. There we go. I'm going to overview what was happening this time last year, where are we now, where are we going to be this fall 2021, and what can we do? So this time last year, I had started by showing where we are as far as prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic and the closing of schools, what was the situation with the achievement gap in the United States? The director of the Institute for Educational Science just put out a blog that said, and it's actually saying catching up, we can't forget where we were. So prior to the pandemic, we actually weren't in great shape to begin with as far as how we were doing within the United States, which are represented by the NAEP scores. So these are done within the United States across all states participate in this. And you can see that from 2015 to 2019, those in the lowest 10th percentile of achievement and 25th percentile were already doing poorly in reading and science. They were holding their own in math. The 10th percentile group was going down. The TIMSS test is an international test that examines how kids are doing for the countries. Not all countries participate, but lots of countries do participate. And you can see that the United States was also going down in science, and those at the lowest percentiles were going down in math. And we were basically holding even. And this has been the story for a long time with the United States. We're not making any strong strides forward. At best, we hold our status within the United States or across the different states. But those at the lowest achievement percentiles are struggling. And that was the group that we were worried about a year ago. It's who we're worried about now. The 5-year trends in 8th grade achievement. So the top table is 4th grade. This is the 8th grade. Sorry about that. And as you can see, even kind of worse. Now, why do we worry about 8th grade achievement? It's because this is the group that's going to be transitioning out of high school, potentially into college, the ones going into the workforce. So we want to make sure that we're like the best levels that we can be. And as you can see, the story is even more dramatic as far as what the achievement was, again, prior to the pandemic. So this is where we were starting. We don't think we made a huge amount of progress forward. And I'm going to show you some data that suggests we're going backwards in some of these even more, which is what we were concerned about. And you can see in the TIMSS, which is the international one, our lowest performers are really performing below other countries. And this is a significant issue, again, for people getting jobs, forming families, and having the kind of human capital you need in order to have a good family situation. So the very first thing, and I talked about this, that had come out was the MAP test that's also done throughout the United States. It's offered 3 times a year. Actually had some data right before everything closed down for the pandemic, and they were doing projections about where we were going to have problems. They thought we would hold our own in reading, that reading, we might see a little bit of problems going on, but in general, students would stay okay in reading, but we were going to have some significant losses in math. And they predicted at the time the reason why reading might be okay is because reading can be picked up in the homes fairly easily. Those kids who read on their own can read more. There was other resources for reading, but math, and people go back and forth about this because we see some kids coming in with pretty strong math ability from their home environments, but that in general, math is taught, and it's taught in the schools. So if we lose kind of the schooling and the learning and teaching that we get from schools, we're likely going to see a reduction in math. So that was their prediction. So what did I say we should do? This was when I thought we were going to be closed and had been closed for just a few months. So kids were going to be out of schooling, had lost the last 3 months of formal schooling, and then they were going to go into the summer where they were not going to have any schooling. I said, we should create a local, state, and national tutoring system, and maybe we could get retired teachers in training, retired university professors to be part of this national tutoring system. We should monitor each child individually, not by grade level or grade proficiency. And we already have in the schools something called the individualized education plans, which would allow us to be able to individualize education, see what the kids, what we thought they should be and where they actually were. Some may be above, some may be below, but we were really going to be concerned about those who are already low performers and where they were. So a year ago, these were my recommendations. Then what happened? Well, the pandemic kept going. There was no kind of ease. We had a little bit of a downward trend in the summer. Things got better. But then they spiked really badly in October, November, and December. So we saw the second surge occur. The state of Michigan had a third surge. So schools tried to reopen. Many of them reopened, had to close again. They were going back and forth between virtual and in person as the pandemic continued to surge. So our way out, which are the vaccines, has just come on. So we still have many kids who are not at school. Many are continuing to be at virtual. So we weren't able to go back face-to-face in the fall. So now what I thought would be a 3-month to 6-month lag has now been an entire year, more than an entire year, that the kids have not necessarily been, certainly not face-to-face all the time, mostly virtual, and many who haven't seen their friends or teachers in a year, in person in a year. So during that time, I was collecting data at the end of the last presentation I did a year ago. I talked about the fact that we were collecting data on Twitter, and what we were trying to see was whether or not we saw patterns of changes in how people were talking about this time period. And so I just wanted to show you some of that data that I alluded to that we now have. So this was from February 2020 to the end of July 2020. And what we wanted to see was whether or not there was a huge increase or an increase at all in people talking about the issues of homeschooling. So you can see the terms that we were looking at: distance learning, homeschooling, online learning, remote learning, down at the bottom. In February, not surprising, almost none of these words were being used. What we see in March is this huge uptick of homeschooling. So terms on Twitter being used, people talking about homeschooling, moving to homeschooling, issues regarding homeschooling. We see quite a huge increase as well in other tweets, as you see how many tweets we're looking at, up to 9,000 that were talking about this, related to a pool of data related to COVID-19. You see, interestingly, around April and May, all of these terms go down. And as we actually, as school goes out for the summer, we see it go almost totally away, right? And so you don't see them, but starting in July, we see an uptick again in all of these terms. As we know, some of the schools were beginning to talk about going back, many of them talking about the fact that they couldn't go back in person. So we were able to track this through social media. We now have new terms because the terms changed about people being at home. We have pandemic pods that showed up, new terms that are talking about parents organizing groups to get together. People started talking about going to private schools, what kind of private schools they were looking at, getting tutors themselves. Again, creating these little learning pods in order to keep their kids going as they saw that there were going to be problems with the schools opening. So we're continuing to follow those. We're adding new terms that are coming on so that we can follow this all the way through. We thought at the time we would be ending this as well as the beginning of the school year started. And so now we've had to go back and pull the new terms, and we're continuing to watch these terms. So you can see, again, the dramatic change in conversations on social media related to school closings. We were also looking at something that's called sentiment. We were trying to figure out how parents were talking about it. Well, actually everyone, because this wasn't just parents exclusively. And what we saw that was in general, and this was happening right at the beginning, there was generally positive sentiment. You saw a little bit less for homeschooling, but what you really saw dramatically was that schools closing had very negative. Almost every statement related to schools closing, or certainly a large percentage, were very negative. So even though people were talking positively about remote learning or online learning or sharing resources, which a lot of people were doing on social media, actually having schools closed was very negative. And we've continued to see that. There's now currently ongoing fights in most school districts between parents who are trying to get their kids back face-to-face, other ones who are more concerned about being back face-to-face and wanting to stay remote, and then every kind of iteration in between. So what are we dealing with now? So that was all leading up to the fall when we thought we were going to be able to go back face-to-face to schooling. That did not happen. So what's the situation we're dealing with now? So I wrote an article for the conversation because I was asked the question, what about kids repeating grades? So this happened just on the cusp of knowing that the kids were not going to be going back necessarily face-to-face. They were going to online learning primarily and homeschooling. So the parents were having to monitor the kids at home. And the issue was, so does this mean that schools are now going to make kids who are not progressing repeat a grade? And I think that's still an open question as to how the schools are now going to deal with a year of kids being out of face-to-face or institutional schooling the way that we've generally understood it. And the fact that they're going to come in trying to put kids in a grade level, like third grade or fourth grade, but they're going to have kids with they already have very diverse amounts of abilities coming into these grade levels. This is why people talk about being proficient at third grade or proficient at fourth grade. So now those proficiencies are going to be kind of all over the map. So then the question is, what is a third grader? can you hold somebody back after something like this pandemic because they haven't met the criteria for proficiency at 3rd grade? Would you really keep them in 2nd grade? So what we have now is a situation where we have, and I will say this as I'm a developmental psychologist, this kind of K1, 2, 3, 4 that we have in the United States is pretty arbitrary as far as where we think there are cutoffs. So grades are just kind of a category that we give things. And now we have kind of people all over the map. But it means something to kids to be told that, well, normally at your age, you'd be a 4th grader, but we're going to call you a 3rd grader. And so this was part of this holding back students repeating grades. This is already done. It was done prior to the pandemic. The state that I live in, Michigan, already had a literacy related repeat of a grade. If you did make proficiency by 3rd grade, they would hold you back, or they put you in a special class. They've been doing that in Florida, in the state of North Carolina, and Wisconsin. They all have various policies related to repeating a grade based specifically on literacy. And so I think the question is this going to happen? My guess is that it's not, but each state will get to decide how they decide this. Each district will get to decide. But my view on this is that it would actually be relatively harmful to try to figure this out. So what we need to do is start talking about things much more broadly in terms of types of grades, like 3rd and 4th, 5th and 6th. So we need to start talking about kind of groupings of grades instead of a grade, so that we allow for this transition in the fall 2021-22 year, where we have kids kind of figuring out where they are and teachers figuring out where they should be or are. Some may actually be well above the grade level that their age would dictate they should be in. So I told you about the work on the map out of the NWEA, who does the map growth data. And so as you remember, at the time last year I was showing projections. So this group was projecting where kids would be. They have continued to collect data. So the data that I'm showing you now are the actual data that they had available to them to look at. What they did is they went prior to the pandemic, winter 19, fall 19, and compared it to winter 20, fall 20 during the pandemic to see about changes so that they could say whether or not we were seeing reading losses. What they see for reading, and this is the first graph you see, is that there's a little bit of issue, and this is by 3 to 4, 4 to 5, 5 to 6, a little bit skewed to the right. The students seem to be holding steady on reading, which is what they predicted. And here the positive values are students scoring higher in the fall than their prior winter score, which is what you want to see when you see increases in achievement. We never want to see achievement going down. We always want to see it on basically a linear increase. And so reading, as they predicted, looks like we didn't have too bad of a situation coming into fall, which is what we were worried about. Not the same story for math. So as they predicted, they were very concerned about what was going to happen between the math scores, what it was going to look like in the fall. And as you can see, these are almost offset distributions. So, and it's clearly the case that the math has taken a hit. Kids are scoring less. It's more negative than it was the year before. So this, again, is coming into fall after 6 months of not having any schooling or going online in part of the winter semester, and then going through the summer with no schooling, and then again with a few months of schooling coming back in the fall, equivalent to what we would expect. What we'd like to see, actually, if anything, is a movement forward from the school year 2019 in 2020, as we see kind of increases coming in, and we don't see that at all. So this gives us some reason for concern that the kids may have held steady with reading, but not with math. So this is kind of a summary of our problems. We had problems with achievement prior to COVID-19. This is going to be, we already had not done a very good job almost anywhere dealing with the achievement gaps that we already have with the lowest performers, with often predicted by lower socioeconomic status that are indexed by education, income, and occupation. So we already had an issue. Now we had an entire year of not just online learning, but multiple versions of learning, right? So kids had hybrid, they had some hours face-to-face, they were pulled back online. Their parents were trying to make sure that they were signed in, everything they needed to be signed in. Lots of parents were still working, they had to work. And so all kinds of versions of, were they at home or were they, at school? It was everything in between. Some things look better than we thought they were going to be. The reading ones look pretty good, but math is a real concern. And just in general, so people know, math is the biggest predictor of kids who go on to four-year college. So seeing these slumps in math and needing to kind of catch them up so that they can apply to college, or for the colleges to deal with maybe a variety of math scores that they haven't dealt with before. This is going to be a transition issue that we're going to have to think about in higher education as well as primary through secondary. I talked a little bit about how in some states we are retaining kids for poor growth in reading scores. Are we going to ignore it? Are we going to hold them back? Are we going to provide additional hours of schooling? So we have a big issue about when kids actually are coming back in. What are they coming back into? What kind of grade are they coming back into? What kind of teaching will they need? So, and again, just to reiterate, and I'll keep saying this, it's going to be kind of all over the map, what the kids are going to need. On top of all of this, parents and teachers are totally stressed out with homeschooling and virtual schooling, and it's not working for many students. It's not working for parents. It's not working for many teachers. So it really is a situation where we're going into a summer. We have some serious issues going on, and we have some very, very stressed and tired people who have to figure out what we're going to do next. But I'm going to challenge us to say we better think about what we're going to do next, because this type of, I've already seen people use the term the lost generation. And I keep saying it's only lost if we decide it's going to be lost. So we really need to make sure we're thinking about this, even under this huge amount of stress. How are we going to deal with fall 2021? So what can we do? So I talked about it a year ago about how everything was moving from the school as an institution for teaching and learning for kids that are basically 5 to 18 years of age, to going back into the home environment. And my concern was that the research I do shows that that's where we see the largest amounts of inequalities, that there are parents, because of the resources they have or do not have, that can provide for their kids for schooling at home. But I would say the majority of families in the United States cannot do that. So this ended up being a real human capital resource that fell back on the parents to have to deal with. And we know those that have higher education and higher income and stable occupation were able, even though they are exhausted, I'm not going to say anything other than we're all totally exhausted, that they were able to buffer this a little bit more. Many parents start to move their kids into charter schools or private schools, those who are willing to go face-to-face. That worked if you had the money and the resources and those institutions in your area to do so. But that just wasn't the case for most of our parents. And you'll probably have already heard and seen the headlines that working moms took the biggest hit because they were covering both education and trying to work. Many of them just had to give up work totally in order to make sure their kids could get the schooling. So they made decisions about where they could put their time. And that all of this changes across time. And this model is just to show that not only is this what kind of is happening, that education, occupation, income kind of lead parental beliefs about educational expectations and then what they do in and outside the home, and that promotes children's academic development, but it also transitions across generations. So this idea of a lost generation is the fact that whatever has happened to these kids will now go through into the next generation as we're trying to catch up. And so we want to make sure that we give this generation all of the resources that we had and prior generations have. And I feel like not just give up, because we have resources that we can do in order to help. So what are the things that I think, and this is going to sound repetitive because it is what I recommended last year. I think we should create local, state, and national tutoring systems, utilizing people, and I should have said those who've just graduated the university, because we also have a group of students, we just had graduation at University of Michigan, that are going out into a very uncertain situation. There are a lot of places that if they can't hire virtually are not hiring right now. So we have a lot of highly educated students that have nowhere to actually go. And so this might be a great time to be thinking about something like, instead of Teach for America, that was this kind of this transition from undergrad into teaching in the schools, maybe we need to have something like Mentor for America, where we have all of these people coming in and thinking about how they're going to mentor through the summer, how they're going to help teachers in the fall and throughout maybe an entire year, supporting kids who need additional amounts of time and education and learning and teaching on these areas, especially math, to be a focus area. We should be providing this for free. It should be part of the public schools. It should be paid for by our states and federal government. And we should be having these during the day and supplement the school day, afternoons. We could even start as soon as the summer to be thinking about what we need to be doing for those who could go face-to-face especially. We need to go and monitor each child individually. We have to figure out, so a lot of people are very unhappy. In fact, the state of Michigan asked for a waiver not to do any standardized testing because everyone's stressed out. What is it going to mean anyway? But if we don't know where kids are, and I don't care if it's these large standardized tests or if it's local tests, we have to figure out where each child is coming back into school. And we need to do that early. We cannot be waiting, till August to figure this out. We need to figure out where kids are so that we can create education plans so that these kids are getting the right kind of teaching when they come back in and are being also told, like, okay, we have the special mentoring program we would like you to get, and we think you're going to need it, specifically related to this skill. One of the things I've talked about is reading and math, because we often separate it by reading and math. But if you'll remember at the beginning, I was also showing science and social studies. Students have also fallen down on those areas. So we're going to need mentoring, not just for reading and math, which is the two that we always look at, but kind of across the board. Kids have lost instruction on all types of areas of education that we're going to have to step up and provide. And we need to reconsider what it means to be at grade level or proficient at grade level. What do grade levels even mean? And how can we move students back and forth between grade levels, not even calling them grade levels, just kind of where you are and where you need to be. We do know the types of things that we want, the skills we want kids to know. So if we want a skill to be, for example, algebra, then we need to figure out whether or not during primary schooling, did they get fractions? Because we know fractions is a stepping off point for being able to do well in algebra. So if we want kids, and right now that is the requirements in the state that I'm in, to reach at least algebra 2, then we need to make sure they have all of the skills needed to be proficient in algebra 2. So it's not whether or not you're in grade 11 and you've taken algebra 2, it's whether or not you have the skills that will lead you to be successful at algebra 2. What do you need and when do you need it? I think is the question, versus you'll get that in 11th grade or get that in 9th grade. So I think we have to really rethink the system that we have of these grade levels. So one positive thing that I thought a lot about when I saw this in the news about Biden's free community college plan is that community colleges have always provided a potentially good transition time for those coming out of high school that may need some additional instruction. It's also provided a relatively inexpensive way to get kind of the first 2 years of a 4-year college plan out of the way. Given that we've got kids in secondary school, so high school, that are struggling and having to apply to college relatively soon, who may be missing some skills, especially in math, or may not have developed them as strongly as they normally would during a normal year, the free community college plan might actually be helpful here for students to think about kind of transitioning into a few additional years, maybe one additional year of high school or one additional year of training post high school, This is especially true since I think we're going to see again that the requirements for what gets you a high school diploma are going to be waived, and other things where we had certain criteria for how you moved on or matriculated to the next step are potentially going to be waived. This might be a great way of saying, okay, well, I'm going to get that extra education that I need in community college, and then I'm going to transfer to a four-year college. And often it's easier to transfer to a four-year college after getting this community college education. So I'm not sure that people have really thought about or talked about the community college as a good transition, but this particular year, it would be really great to have free community college or subsidized community college in order for our high school kids in the next year or two or three to have a situation where they can get this additional training that they need in order to transfer to a four-year college and feel comfortable that they're going to do well at a four-year college. I also want to note that there are terminal degrees at a community college, the associate degree, where you can get degrees in nursing, daycare provider, technical professions. So it also provides a pathway to get these kind of living wages that we want to see for people who have gotten behind or lost, that we actually have a way for them to get educated and can still move forward, right? So there's even things just with an AA degree or this associate degree from a community college level of which you can enter into a profession and have a successful life ahead. So there are two options, I think, for this. And so if this actually does come through, I think we need to start mentoring and talking to kids about community college as a particular transition, but again, also as a way to get some additional training that might get you into a profession that will be useful to you in the future and into forming families, buying houses, buying cars, et cetera. So that's all I have to share with you today. I'm excited to talk more about this, especially to hear from others about what you might think are also good ways forward. I put some things forward that I think are useful, but I know we're all in the same situation, and I think it would be great to hear from the rest of you about what you think. My Twitter account is on here, the YouTube account for getting the entire series, also ISR's Twitter, are all available here. And you can also contact anybody at ISR to get further information. And thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thanks very much, Pam, for another fascinating presentation with lots of issues covered. Let me just note that we had some technical issues. I apologize. We had apparently some people got the wrong link earlier today and it took them a while to join. And just wanted to note this has been recorded from the beginning and it'll be posted on the website so you can join. And just to note to Pam that some people might have missed the first part of the presentation. So lots of material covered. I'll jump into some questions that have been coming in. One question that came in is says, I agree that we need to monitor each child individually. Don't you think it would be helpful to address the workload that we put on the already overloaded teachers? Teachers will need assistance with doing this, which likely won't be available to be done by mentors. So it seems like a very good point. Teachers are already pretty stressed out and giving them lots of individual attention sounds even harder. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And in the state of Michigan, we have a teacher shortage right now, which might be true for multiple other states as well. So it is a serious issue. I think in the case of the mentors, I think they can be helpful, but I think we do need to think about how we get more teachers in the schools as well to help support our ongoing teachers, provide more for this individual planning. It is hard to think about. I mean, there are many teachers who would say, and I think they do, I've been in the classrooms and seen them do this, that know where their students are and they do adjust the curriculum in order to deal with this kind of, again, distribution that they've always dealt with in the classroom. I think we're going to need a lot more assistance. The idea that one person, and we don't actually have that in secondary, but in primary and junior high, some of the junior high transitions, that one person is the only person that should be teaching these kids is probably not a good view. It's not one that we hold when they get older. And so I think the idea that we would have as we do with music pullout and art pullout, that we would have math pullout, we'd have science pullout, even in primary school, would be perfectly fine. So I think the idea that a single teacher needs to be the person who directs all of this is not a good idea in general, probably for our education system in the primary schools. And this would be a good time to think about, well, what if we had kind of the homeroom teacher idea for primary, and then have additional teachers helping out for these other areas so that you could spread the students out and do more individualized teaching. So I think that is something that could be an idea that would help with this situation. Might be a good idea in the long run of education.
So that is related to a question about why these differences between reading and math in particular, which you showed, and you also mentioned science and social science. What is the story for why reading continued to improve, or at least didn't go down, whereas math had such disappointing results? And is probably those also reflect issues that are going to come up in the coming year, presumably.
So I think with reading, and I'm taking from what other people have talked about, the type of reading resources that we've had available. We've been intervening on reading for a very long time. It is the only intervention we have in primary schools where you get pulled out for reading teachers. You don't get pulled out if you're doing poorly in math, which I think is problematic because I study math achievement, and we see when kids don't start achieving, I mean, there is kind of no way to catch up if you're not keeping up. But for reading, we've had since the 1960s, we've had interventions trying to improve literacy. So in this case, I think we had a lot of resources available to the parents, and it's also a little bit easier when you're trying to calm your kids down to read to them or have them read quietly, or to provide written and printed materials. A lot of the education TV programming and media programming is toward literacy. So I think it just is the case that we have, which isn't to say, by the way, we still lag in literacy in the United States, but we do have things in place to intervene, of which parents could pick up relatively easily, of which were easier to do virtually than math and training math. And so I think in that way, we were able to show something that we have a lot of resources for, that we have a lot of interventions. We also have a lot of trained teachers in reading, that we were able to kind of keep it status quo or as close to status quo as we could. And we just were not able to do that with math. And I think that we were worried about that. We've seen that be a challenge in education in general, always. It's not just now, and it just kind of fell even further as we predicted it might if we didn't have a concerted way of dealing with math the way that we did with reading. So I think it just is our tradition, well, the very long tradition we have on intervening with reading, that we were ready to deal with issues regarding reading for everybody versus what we were going to do for math.
So a follow-up, a lot of effort was put into interactive online learning, both synchronous and asynchronous, and yet we've seen these problems. What do you think? Why didn't those work? What should be done going forward to make them work better? Or are they just not a good idea for kids at these ages?
The most recent research has suggested that really high quality virtual learning can be successful. But I think the question is, what is high quality virtual learning? And remember, I did talk about the fact that people are moving in and out of this all the time, right? So sometimes it was synchronous, sometimes it was asynchronous, sometimes it was face-to-face, and this was different all across the United States. So the delivery of our education intervention or system was even more than it usually is, totally erratic across the United States this year. So I think in general, and I can talk to you mostly about the college students I dealt with, there are some things that they don't mind taking asynchronous because it's just kind of information that's coming in that they actually could. I don't know how many times I heard people say, I could just read this. I don't even really need to watch a video for this. I could just read this. But then there's other work that really does involve having more people in the room or needing kind of assistance in the moment. Something like math, where you got something wrong or you thought about it incorrectly and you have a teacher there or somebody else there to say, no, this is how you do that. And I think certainly the asynchronous was very difficult for that because there was nobody to correct that. And even with the synchronous, it was really hard. So when you're teaching, and I did teach on Zoom, it's very hard when you're like searching everyone's face to try to figure out if everyone got what you said, if they all did what they needed to do. So we kept the same class sizes even through all of what was going on. And so teachers were still monitoring all that. And sometimes it's difficult. You're not going to catch everything that's going on. And then, of course, we didn't have students on at all. So we have a large group of students that never engaged at all with any type of virtual learning. So again, are we going to use it or not use it? I think in general, there's a lot of positive to be said for doing things face to face. We already saw that at the college level. That's been questioned many times, but I think clearly it's true primary through secondary. So I think there are some things we'll be able to supplement with virtual learning, but it won't be the entire learning situation. We just don't know how to do it well at this point, even if we ever wanted to move to that. So I think we will never move to a fully virtual and be successful. There'll be some things we can move to virtual that we'll be successful at.
I'll have to say, having just visited our grandchildren for the first time in over a year, that eighth graders, our 8-year-old second grader was incredibly comfortable with using synchronous and asynchronous, which I don't remember doing that when I was 8 years old. But so they they certainly picked up some vocabulary, for better or worse.
Yeah.
A question that always comes up, and this has certainly highlighted it, is the question about whether the summer break is too long. So one of our participants asks, what are your thoughts about a shorter summer break, at least for the near future, and maybe permanently, to deal with these losses in learning between the 2 school years?
Yeah, this has been an ongoing research area for people to be looking at. What the COVID slump was picked up from the summer slump, which a lot of people talk about, that all students' achievement goes down. It doesn't matter kind of who you are. But the kids that are high achievers jump back very quickly once they get back into the schooling environment, but other kids don't. So we've gone to all year schooling in some places to try to take care of this. There is an issue about how much, and I will say, I'm not sure we actually have, a good randomized control trial that tells us this, but how many days of learning do you need in order to actually accomplish a skill? So we make guesses. 180 is a kind of a normal school year. We worry about snow days. If you're not getting 180 days, you've missed 1 day of learning. But again, I don't think we know that 181 or 179 makes much of a difference on achievement. I would guess that it doesn't. There is an interesting question as to whether or not summer, which was again built on, if historically speaking, why we do whatever we do in education is actually based on a time point when we were an agricultural society. What's been kind of interesting is when we became much more industrial and now we're much more technological, we've never actually adjusted the schools in relation to that. So we don't have to help our parents out. Some people do, but most kids don't have to go help their parents out on the farms in the summertime, and we don't need to get off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to go do our chores so that we can get to bed at 8 o'clock in the afternoon. But we haven't adjusted our school system to that, to the fact that we actually could train more rapidly and across the school year. It could be matched with parents who are in the workforce as well, so that we wouldn't have this kind of after school, what are kids doing after school, which is also an issue. And we wouldn't have this huge 3-month summer off. I'm sure there are people right now that are running summer camps that don't like me to say this, but I think you could do camps that are not 3 months at different points in time in the year. So, and that's usually what a full year does. They still do 180 days. They just spread it out with smaller kind of off times. I think if you think about learning, we don't learn for 9 months and then stop learning for 3 months and then start up again. We're learning all of the time. And so the way that almost all of us need to be stimulated is kind of constant. It doesn't need to be at a high amount, but it needs to be constant. So this kind of 3-month summer doesn't really make sense. And we don't do it because of learning. We do it for historical reasons that have nothing to do, and it's hard to change systems, and the education system has been very hard to change. So I do think we need to be spending the summer figuring out ways to go ahead. I will tell you, we are, and I think you all know this, we are in May. The public schools have literally weeks left before they're closed, and there hasn't been a ton of information out about what would happen during the summer to help kids get ready for the fall. And I'm really concerned about that. We should be hearing a lot about types of programs and services that are available through our public schools, and I'm not hearing much chatter on that at all. So I think we're not going to have much for this summer, but we may need to be thinking about next summer.
Great. Here's another question from the audience. You've touched on this to some degree, but it says, these were excellent suggestions for going forward. Which changes that have already been implemented during the pandemic are likely here to stay for better or worse?
I think, I mean, the one thing we implemented was virtual teaching. I think we're going to have some form of virtual teaching from now on. There were people that were thinking about it, and we've had in the state of Michigan, we have a requirement for virtual school before 1 semester or 2 semesters before you graduate. So we've been flirting with the idea for a long time. I think now there are going to be things that could move to being more virtual, which I think actually using virtual teaching to supplement face-to-face teaching might be a very useful way of thinking about going forward. But I'm pretty sure we're not, well, what do I know? We're still doing agricultural education, but to the extent that I think we now have things set up, we have technology set up, we've dealt with a lot of the problems of access. I think we're now going to see virtual teaching coming in across the board for all age groups. And it'll be interesting to see how it does. Again, as supplemental education, I think it could be incredibly useful to have.
Great. You've talked about, the many ways that parents play a role, the students themselves, the schools, and government. What can you say about the balance of these as we go forward? What the balance between the parents' responsibility, the school's responsibility, the state and federal government to deal with all these issues?
Right. So as I said, I think the most difficult part of what happened in the pandemic is that institutions of schooling that we've now had for centuries, we went back to everything falling on the home environment with the parents. I think we know that this is not going to be a successful avenue forward, and we are no longer a community or nation, and I don't think most nations are, of which schooling should be in the home environment. So we need to figure out what to do going forward to make sure that if anything like this happens again, that we have other types of resources available for people to meet. So in general, I think because of the achievement gap, and I've talked about this before, that we have, I actually think instead of telling parents that they need to train their kids better, we need to provide institutions in order to do that. And we see some of that coming through with people talking about subsidized daycare, free preschool. These are the types of things I think help definitely, because the home environment for a very long time has never been actually the place for primary teaching should happen. And it certainly is where we see the inequalities coming in. So if you're in a family that has high education and high income, you're able to buy whatever situation. We've seen that inequality really shine during the pandemic. Those parents have been able to do lots of stuff to help supplement their kids' education. Again, that is not the majority of people in our country. The mean education level is some college, so some training after high school. So we have a lot of parents that need assistance, and if education, as it always has been in countries, are seen as the primary way that we create a workforce that goes out and keeps our country strong, then we have to invest in education. And I think in that case, it's institutions, it's thinking about early daycare, it's thinking about subsidized preschool or free preschool, making it just like public school. There's no reason why these days, especially with working parents, that we still have a situation where if your kid goes to daycare or goes to preschool, it's because you have enough money to do that. And then, it's only when they turn 5 that we as a country come forward. So I think it has to be at the federal level. It has to be at the state level that these decisions are made. When it gets to the district level, we start moving into inequalities again. So it has to be at kind of higher levels in order to reduce the inequalities that we see with people in the United States, at least picking where they live, and that our education system is based on that.
Great. We have a question about how the pandemic has affected expectations, aspirations, and other academic attitudes. The pandemic has emphasized many advantages that come with a college degree. This is the group that's tended to remain employed, has been able to work from home, but has made college less affordable for those whose parents lost their jobs. Previously, attitudes have been pretty robust across socioeconomic status. Is the pandemic going to create an attitudes gap, presumably about college and about education in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think in some ways, education has moved up in people's mind as being this important thing that we need to have. When you lose something or have something get disrupted the way we have, people have started to I think, see the value in it. I actually think some of the higher SES parents that are generally the ones with the highest expectations that their kids are going to go to school are probably now thinking about, well, are they really going to get to four-year college? And that's why I was talking about the free community college. Like, what are the kind of buffers that can be added? One of the things I'm a little bit worried about is hearing parents who have gotten really upset with the public schools as they struggle to try to figure out how to help. And so I do think if we're going to have, again, I hate this term, but a lost generation, then that means that the expectations across the board are going to come down for where our kids are going to be. So I do think that is certainly a potential. If there isn't some intervention coming in, then we're going to see a realignment of whether or not people think their kids actually can go to college and have enough skills to do so. So certainly something to watch out for in the future, but would be something you might predict from what we see going on right now.
You talk mostly about public schools, but one of the things that we know has happened this year is there's been some switch of people who had been in public schools to put their children in private schools. This may be an issue going forward. What any thoughts about that and how it relates to all of these issues?
So this is what people have been referring to as these inequalities that have occurred during the pandemic. So those who had the resources and the ability and the time, all the other things that go along with why people make choices for schools, did move their kids into public schools. I had a lot of my colleagues who didn't want to tell other people that they were moving their kids out of the public schools, but they really just felt like they couldn't let their children kind of flounder with whatever was being provided. Because again, there was expectations that people were going to be able to go back face to face. So the hybrid situation was created for the fall. Almost everyone had to go back to virtual when the surges came. So there was a lot of uncertainty as to what was actually going to be provided. And pretty early in the fall semester, we saw people seeing that things were going to start going badly and starting to move their kids into other education opportunities. The public schools are our number one intervention in the United States for changing the situation of everybody into one that could be more productive. And getting education is something we can't take away. Once you're educated, you can utilize that going forward for lots of things. And so I think the reason we talk a lot about public schools is because it is the resource that everybody in the United States has access to. They do not have access to the private schools. They sometimes don't have access to charters. Even though charters take students, they also, we know that if there's particularly high behavior problems, they get rid of these students and send them back to the public schools. So the public schools are also the ones of which policy can be implemented in. We really can't implement policy in private schools. So that's another reason I talk a lot about the public schools, but there certainly was a shift. And I think it is a concern because our attendance is what decides public school funding, that we have quite a few parents who have moved their kids from the public schools into some other private situation or charter situation and will not return, which means that there will be a shortfall in a lot of the public schools budgets due to kids no longer being in the public school. So we have a lot still unfolding that is going to be related to parental choices that were made during the pandemic. So I think parents had the right to make whatever choice they thought they should make, but it certainly will have an impact on how we see public money supporting education.
Well, this has been great. Let me end with one question that combines a couple of questions that have come in. Last year, the Michigan legislature passed a resolution that waived the requirement for in-person school days, gave school districts power to decide what to do on their own, and caused discrepancies across the state. And there's a question about whether that will continue going forward. So I guess I'd like to end with like your crystal ball. Everybody wants to know what's going to happen. The related question is, what can we expect in terms of scientifically informed school reopening plans? Many districts say they're going to follow the science, and yet they have done very different things so far and going forward. So tell us what's going to happen.
Yeah, I wish I had the crystal ball. So this is really interesting because we're seeing a fight going on between parents right now about, this is the science and this is the science. And one of the beauties about being at the Institute for Social Research is that we know you have to worry about where the data is coming from. And a lot of the science that is coming in, what the sample is, who they've asked, where they're getting the data from is a big question. We don't know if we're getting the population information or whether we're getting subsets of groups of parents that don't really represent even the population in their district. And the science itself is also constantly being done at the same time that this is happening. So we're not in that situation where we can sit back and say we can predict forward because we're not in the future yet. So the best we can do is keep taking data and kind of figure this out after the fact, I'm sorry to say, but that's kind of the way the science is going. I would be concerned about anything that's coming out quickly. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out too fast and it's not as rigorous as we would like it to be. And so that's why I think everyone has their favorite piece of science or what is called science because there's a researcher who said something. And I think we just don't know. We don't even know all there is to know about the COVID virus itself. So that's still unfolding as well. But the science about education certainly is nowhere near being figured out for what is going on. So I don't really know kind of how to answer some of the first questions about the 180 days. I can say that I looked up, at least in the state of Michigan, and they have not reinstated that you could have less school days. So there is, again, what is 180 days of education? Why does it matter? I don't know that we know, but I do know when districts get to make decisions, they're often not making decisions for the ones who need education the most. And this is where we have the inequalities coming in. They're generally making decisions for the people who are most associated with the school board and know them and have a voice. And so every point in time, we have to think about what is really good for our population. The state of Michigan, our president at the University of Michigan recently rattled off quite a few pretty dismal percentages of where the state of Michigan is across the United States, and it's not in great shape. We're kind of in the lower third of performers. That's where we're starting. And kind of where we go forward will depend on how we decide to educate the state of Michigan students. And that isn't going to be 180 days, right? We're going to have to think about I think we're going to need every day. We're going to need every day to educate the kids. How that's done, whether it's in the school, whether it's at home, whether it's virtually, I think is the question. But, we're always going to need more days and not less.
Okay, very good. Well, you covered a lot of ground on very important issues. Thanks very much, Pam, for joining us. Thanks to everybody in the audience for joining us. Apologies again if you had problems with the link and had to join us late. The presentation has been recorded and you can watch it later along with all of the other ISR Insights events of the year, and be on the lookout for future ISR events. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks very much, Pam, for a fascinating presentation, and we'll see everyone at the next ISR events.
Thank you.